And welcome to Flyers Pulse with HTS. I am joined today by a very special guest, if you can see on YouTube. If not, I will tell you it is Riley Cote. Riley, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you again.
Good to see you again, too. So, for all of those that don't know, I had a conversation with Riley maybe about a couple months ago where we really had a great conversation about cannabis use. And I was able to put it into an article, and then some time went by. And I thought, you know what? Let's get this message out there for a bigger audience. So, Riley has joined me today, and we're going to talk all about the cannabis use. And I think that this is a conversation that just goes beyond hockey, Riley. We're not just talking about athletes. We're talking about people, everyday people that go to 9 to 5 jobs and how they could really benefit from the use of cannabis. So I just want to ask you, and I know this might be a little bit repetitive, but how did you become such a big advocate for cannabis use?
Through my own personal experience, honestly, trial and error, pain management, anxiety management, sleep management, yeah, concussion management. You go down the list. It's helped me in so many different ways, and my relationship with it has evolved over time. But I would say just having my experience with it and it helping me get through some hard times, challenging times. Help me get to the yoga mat, get me onto the meditation cushion. So it's been a huge ally. um, I want to say even outside of hockey, but for sure through my hockey career and post hockey career, it just helped me in so many different ways. And as I mentioned, the relationship continues to reform itself as you do the work and you have less pain and you maybe manage your anxiety and your sleep and your recovery a little bit better. And it's been a godsend.
So, one of the things I found really interesting from our previous conversation was talking about that alcohol use. And I think for a lot of people, it goes beyond the drink. People can relate. You have a long day at work, you want to grab a drink. That's a very typical thing that I feel like a lot of people hear these days. Let's grab a drink. So, when did that switch become from maybe let's go from the drinking to maybe discovering other ways to maybe cope and deal with the anxieties or deal with the stress of a hard day?
Sure, I think it's been naturally evolving. I'm not sure it was just like one day, you wake up and it's like, oh yeah, and everyone's using cannabis. I think it's been a slow evolution as state legislations have passed and there's been more growing legal markets and there's more acceptance for cannabis and the stigma has maybe been minimized to some degree. And naturally, as a byproduct, more and more people use it. They seek it or they're curious. And naturally, what happens is when you start using cannabis based products, obviously with the appropriate dose and setting and the whole bit, is that um, a lot of people really do like the way they feel. It really does take the edge off. They do sleep better. They recover quicker. They just feel a little more spacious. And naturally, I think the alcohol dwindles as a byproduct of it. I'm not sure a lot of the times if they're actually intentionally going out of their way to do it. Maybe some for sure, but it just seems like a natural byproduct of just using cannabis, feeling better, and also like not waking up hungover. I think the catch to the booze is that it makes you feel like a bag of shit the next day and potentially the next day, and it drags and it does as you age. We know we don't metabolize the alcohol as well. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, alcohol again, that's a science supports that it's a nervous system depressant. It is hard on the body. It is hard to process, and it makes us make silly decisions. And I'm not going to sit here and sound like a hypocrite because I drank for years and years and years, and I guess I just for myself, I found a better way to manage the grind of life, obviously through sport. Physical inflammation and the whole bit, but just like the grind of life, the stressors of life. There's a more easeful way of doing it. I think cannabis is now showing to be that. It's a gentler tool. It's much safer than alcohol to me. It's like legitimate medicine. It's not just a numbing agent. And I think a lot of people that self medicate with alcohol don't even realize what they're actually doing. Yes, it appears like a good time. It appears like a party, but a lot of the time it's a numbing agent, and they're just trying to numb the stress and the anxiety, and just like hopefully that can go away for a few hours. Or I think the consciousness of cannabis that like allows you to process some sort of awareness around maybe the pain, physical pain, emotional pain, mental, the mental pain. But we're not numbing it. There's an awareness there, that we're able to process it. So it's a different agent. Altogether, but much safer, much easier on the body. And I think just naturally, as you legalize plant medicines, people are naturally um, going to start using them appropriately. Or, I mean, maybe a lot of people are misusing them, but I think naturally, what happens is people find relief, and they just want to find a better course of action.
And thank you for sharing all that. And I think one of the things when I'm thinking about the hockey players that I interact with on teams like the Flyers, for say, is I see some of them in pain all the time. You have a tough game, and obviously it's a very physical game, as you know. So, do you feel like that is something that the NHL should incorporate into modern day medicine with NHL players, is incorporating cannabis use? Or do you think that it's never going to fly because of the stigma that people have that they just associate with when it comes to cannabis?
I'm not sure it's the stigma. I think it lands up being a little bit deeper than that. I think, in the NHL, you obviously have Canadian hockey teams and you got, American hockey teams. Well, Canada's got a full on recreational illegal cannabis program as well as a medical one, national, right? Here in the United States, it's still Schedule One drugs. So there's a little bit of I say a liability legal issue there for them to say we're not going to test for cannabis anymore, go nuts and build out a protocol in the strength and conditioning sports science department and, you know, integrate this into your regimen. I think teams are already doing that. I think on some level, maybe not as structured as I'm describing, but that's where it's going. And, in the world of sports science, sports recovery, I mean, if you're not using cannabinoids in some way, shape, or form when it comes to recovery. Obviously, we're talking about very predictable, dosing. Even if we're talking about ingesting it, it could be just topicals, massages, anti-inflammatory, flushing out inflammation, that whole world. Obviously, there's the ingestible, and it needs to be obviously very well thought out and a protocol is created. But I'd like to think that most teams have an eye on it at least, and if not, are already doing some internal work, whether it's quietly, certainly not approved by the league, because schedule for cannabis is still a banned substance in the NHL. They still actually test for cannabis. That being said, no one, I think I mentioned this last time we spoke, like no one goes to the substance abuse program for cannabis alone. They're not calling you up and saying, hey, you tested positive for THC. We're going to put you in the 30-day detox program. It doesn't work like that. They know that cannabis is, you say, essentially harmless, and it doesn't come without its harms, because it could definitely, there's a negative side of all things if you've used them, for sure. But I think that they're realizing that the harm reduction model of cannabis, and the guys are drinking less and taking less opiates and less Ambien and whatever else they've been popping on the planes and whatever else, that naturally this is a harm reduction model, whether it's deliberate or not. They're seeing this with the players, so they're not going to go out and enforce this. But where I see this going, once you have the United States descheduling. I mean, I say rescheduling, it's probably going to land up being, but descheduling in a perfect world, I just like this is not a highly addictive substance. It's the opposite of what they're telling us, almost, right? Once that happens, then you're going to see like legitimate protocols within sports science, sports recovery, sports performance, because really it's all about that. You talk about like the work versus recovery. As soon as we're done the workload, we're in recovery mode, and the sooner we can get our nervous systems and our bodies in a more relaxed state and promoting a good night's rest, in the right way. Because obviously there's substances out there, as we mentioned, that can do this on some level, but not that doesn't quite work the same. This is like, these are the edge. This is the edge, like on some level, and maybe it's not even an edge. It's just like everyone will be doing this or already is. I think most guys on their own are doing it, maybe with the help of some of the strength and conditioning sports science guys. But I mean, you can get very predictable and with dosing and very predictable outcomes, and depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can get even into some pretty deep stuff. When you're managing certain ailments with within sport, if you will, being very very calculated with how we manage the cannabinoid protocol. So it's going that direction. It's just, to me, it's not so much the stigma, that's just the byproduct of the laws itself. That naturally, as the U.S. figures this thing out on a federal level, that you're going to see every sports organization kind of really really creating something robust. And the NFL, I think last year, removed cannabis as a bad substance. So all of a sudden, like, you're looking at once a league that was like demonizing their players for using cannabis and kicking them out of the league and all this crazy stuff. That finally have come to their senses and said, we're not gonna test you guys anymore. We're not gonna enforce it, obviously, and you guys aren't gonna lose your jobs over a natural pain management tool and then be forced to use an opioid, and wash it down with some booze. You know what I mean? And good luck, and give a little tap on the back. So, I think these guys are coming to their senses on some level, but it's only as quick as legislation for the most part. It's the federal legislation would be the biggest one here that would, to me, open up the floodgates for some really robust cannabis recovery programs.
Again, this is Flyers Pulse with HTS. I'm joined by special guest Riley Cote as we're talking about the use of cannabis and the positive impact that cannabis does have, not just on hockey players, but in everyday life. One of the things that I was not able to talk to you last time about, Riley, which I'm really intrigued about, is your relationship with Trulieve. And I think that this is a partnership and a relationship that honestly I found quite interesting. So, summarize to me in your own words about what that relationship's been like.
It's been great. Honestly, they're so awesome to work with. It's a cannabis education initiative. So much like these types of conversations, it's bringing some awareness to the cannabis plant, and I'm not going to sit here and say I know it all. I can only speak from experience, but like, it's really about storytelling, sharing personal experience, but then but observing other people's stories, and seeing how cannabis is helped them, because it's not a perfect, one size fits all approach when you talk about certain varieties and certain delivery systems. But I think this cannabis initiative with Trulieve is certainly helpful to just bring some of these stories to light, be vulnerable, talk to maybe some of the varieties that have worked for you and different delivery systems that have helped you with certain different, whether it's pain management or sleep management or whatever it is. But I think just speaking to it, being vulnerable, certainly helps this education initiative. And then, there's obviously a medical support staff on Trulieve that can speak to more like the medical, the true medical side of things. But nonetheless, like the fact that they're doing this, and they're, you're giving me an opportunity to, to speak to this and participate in some of their, community activations. I was at the best affiliate with them the other day, and, just like, being able to, stand proudly with them, and say, hey, we're actually, talking about this in a real legitimate way, and trying to get people to understand that there's, say, a cannabis product pretty much for everybody on some level, even without THC. It could be just CBD, but just, some sort of cannabis based product that could be helpful. Just normalizing. You said it. It's like, it's not just about athletes, just about sports. Like, this is way beyond sports. Every single person on the planet deals with the exact same things, right? I mean, they all have to deal with stress, and they all have to somehow manage it, and we all have, physical pain on some level at some point in our lives, and we all sleep. We all got to relax, and be able to sleep. So these elements are consistent across the board for all people, all walks of life. So when I talk about like the recovery process, like the sports recovery process, it's the same for everybody. We're just not playing a sport. You're working a 9 to 5, like that's your sport. Now you got to go home and like somehow recover, go to sleep and rest, and wake up in the morning, do it all over again, because it is performance at the end of the day. So, but exciting, super exciting. I love working with their team. Their marketing team is so awesome. They listen to ideas. We collaborate on certain ideas. They have ideas, and we're all kind of throwing them in a hat, and trying to make sense of how do we market this in a mindful way. I mean, I teach yoga, meditation, drumming. So it's, how do we bring this through the vehicle of mindfulness, versus, like, you see in recreational markets, how quickly cannabis can look like the way a lot of people think cannabis is. It loses, the real true medicinal property through the lens of recreational use, even though it's the same, it could be the same exact herb. I think the perspective that people see, it's like, oh, well, those guys are just getting high, versus what we're talking about here is like very intentional, predictable cannabis use, so we can have predictable outcomes. We're not just guessing. We're not just picking up a random gummy and hoping for the best and say we're gonna have a great time tonight until your belly up and foaming out of your mouth. So we're trying to really is spin this in a very legitimate, predictable way where there's no guesswork. We're trying to give you guys the best opportunities to have the best outcomes as possible. Through this education, it's it's a lot of times just storytelling and being vulnerable.
One of the takeaways that I had from our previous conversation is when you said that you have to respect cannabis and that it's something that you can't just go into without having respect for it. Because again, if you take too much without the proper research, then you're not going to have the outcome that you should be having, the intentional outcome. And I think that alone, Riley, that stood out to me in such a way where after our interview, I actually thought about that for days. And it became a point of conversation between my friends and I because I just couldn't stop thinking about that. I think with so many things in life, it's kind of like even with social media for maybe people that have never experienced anything with cannabis or alcohol. I'm just trying to make it very simple. You're on your phone and then you're scrolling and scrolling, and then it's been hours, and you just told yourself, hey, it's going to be 20 minutes. So I think just having that mindset of, I am doing this for this reason. It could be maybe to fall asleep at night, to take away back pain, whatever the reason is. And that stood out to me so much. So I just wanted to commend you on that alone because I think that for me, as somebody that didn't really have a bias at all towards cannabis by any means, it made me appreciate it so much more for what it can do in a positive sense because I feel like a lot of people, again, when you think of cannabis, not all people, but when people think of cannabis, they might think of it as just a way to get high. And when you explained it, you said it in such a way that it truly did take back what cannabis is meant for, which is for, taking the pain away. It's natural, it's an herb. So I just want to commend you on that. Um,
Thank you. That's
Going
intention,
Yeah,
right? Just being intentional, right? And then if you understand the why, then it becomes medicinal if you're using it with intention. If you're just numbing, you can use cannabis for that. And if you're doing it mindlessly, that would be more, in the other world, so a big difference when you talk about intention. So I appreciate you acknowledging that.
always. And is that how the yoga came into play too? Because yoga is, again, a very mindful activity. I practice yoga, and whenever I practice, it's very, intuitive. You get into a sense of just being able to understand your body, understand your mind. So did the yoga come first, or was it the cannabis that came first?
I
Or a
mean,
combination?
I guess they kind of came hand in hand. Definitely had a relationship with cannabis, a misunderstood one, with cannabis before I was really introduced to the essence of yoga. And then even like that relationship with yoga has evolved because I was, looking at it and approaching it really through the meat suit, like the physical body, just physical practice. But, to what you're saying is like that practice becomes intentional. Even like every single day, every practice, I'm starting with an intention just for that practice. So it's really no different. It's being intentional with everything you do. And I think that's when you start like the same very same things can appear different once you have intentionality behind them, right? And then your life shifts because it has a different meaning. So you could practice yoga and it could appear like you're practicing yoga, but if you have no intention, if you're just using it just as a form of exercise, well, it becomes just that, and it's just physical exercise, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're very intentional with it, all of a sudden it's a breathing exercise, it's a form of meditation, and it's physical exercise, and it's moving energy, and it's if you get really deep with what the practice is, that's what you get out of it. So same thing with cannabis, and you can abuse anything, right? I mean, you said respect cannabis, and this, as you alluded to, it goes across the board for everything, right? It's like we have to respect our food, right? Or about everything we kind of come in contact with. Otherwise, something, in the world of a tool, right? I mean, it can quickly be used as a weapon if misused, right? So it's like any tool, anything around us must be respected, and no different with cannabis. And I think that for people that are out there that already have a relationship with cannabis, once you become more intentional with it, once you start maybe creating a little space, maybe making a little I don't know, you want to even call it like, a ritual around it. But yeah, I mean, so some sort of ritual, light a candle, a little incense, like create a little space. All of a sudden, it becomes even more meaning because you're really adding the elements of, as you talked about, like the mindset, the mindset, and then the setting. You've created a safe space. So all of a sudden, the exact same herb, the exact same product becomes even more powerful. The whole body, the whole being kind of appreciates it on a different level. So I personally think that piece alone is probably the most important thing, and the thing I speak to the most is because just that alone will dictate a different outcome, whether you're intentional or not. That in the exact same herb come out of the exact same package, but all of a sudden your mindset and your intention is different, and it's very focused. Then all of a sudden, the very same vehicle has a different way of teaching and helping and
Absolutely.
healing.
Absolutely. Now, my last question, it's going to be hockey related, but at the same time, after the conversations that we've had, I thought this was going to be a really interesting answer on your end. So, you were an enforcer, and right now I am seeing Oliver Bonk, one of the Philadelphia Flyers' guys, have MMA training and a couple other players too. And I'm just curious on your thoughts with this. How do you feel about maybe the lack of enforcers in the NHL these days? And would you like to see that physicality return to the ice?
Well, I don't ever see it going back to the way it was for sure. I mean, absolutely not like the Broad Street Bullies, even my era. When I caught the tail end of the enforcer era, I don't see it going back that way at all. I do appreciate and love the skill of the game. That being said, there's always going to be the essence of hockey, which is heart, right, and desire and compete. And there's a few elements of hockey you just can't take out of it that naturally breed emotion, and emotion potentially boils over, and then next thing you know, you're dealing with fisticuffs. So having young guys train, and get a little confidence, just a little, a few tips on just like where to grab, and just like how to weather the storm if if something
Yeah.
goes awry. I think that just adds a level of confidence to the individual. Not that Oliver Bonk's going to go out there and try and fight 30 times a year. That's not what this is. And for the fans that are thinking, like, I've seen a couple of comments like, "Oh, the Broad Street Bullies are back. They got a fight coach and this and that." Like, I'm not sure it has anything to do with that at all. It's just about you giving a couple of these young guys, a little confidence. Like, if you get in a skirmish, you get in a scrum, someone's challenging you, you get into a bad spot, like, you know, a little one-on-one on where to grab, and some tips, tuck your chin and not get hit, and maybe throw a little harder punch so you can do better in the fight, obviously. But the training itself isn't about like, oh my gosh, Broad Street Bullies are coming back and we're going to go out there and push teams around. Like, certainly not in the fisticuffs department. And are they doing, I forget the last part of your question there was like, are we doing enough to bring the Broad Street Bullies or the fighters back? Like, it's every single year there's more and more of these fighters that are weaned out of the game. Like there's very, very few guys that actually can play and fight 10 times a year. Like, I was fighting 30 times a year when I was playing. You know what I mean? It's
Yep.
never going back that way for sure. But the spontaneous, in the moment, emotional fights still do happen now and then. And being ready and being prepared, especially as a young guy trying to cultivate some confidence, and especially in a city like Philly, it certainly doesn't hurt. So I think the optics are more misleading than the essence of what's being taught there. But it's certainly good training. Like, for any like hockey player out there, even if you have no intention of getting into a fight, like this type of training, I did it. I mean, it's amazing for balance. Like, you almost can't like get knocked over when, at least in a fight, when guys are pushing and pulling on you. So from that standpoint alone, standing tall, having a little extra confidence. If you're in a scrum, someone pushes you, you push them back. Like, you feel better about yourself if you have to actually drop the gloves, not get you get your ass beat. So um, I think that's really what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective on that. When I was at the draft, it was like remote this year. So it wasn't like I was actually in
Mm.
LA. But every single prospect that I spoke to that the Flyers drafted, they all said essentially that they want to be like the Broad Street Bullies, that they want to be, being able to create dominance on the ice and be aggressive and to throw the punches when needed. And I thought that was a really interesting takeaway just because the game of hockey has changed so much. I mean, you were really the last player that I could recall watching wearing the orange and black, throwing like as many punches as you did. So it's interesting how the game is shifting. But I guess just a follow up on that overall. Do you think the game is shifting just because there's so much now awareness of what can go wrong physically when it comes to fighting? Or do you just think that they want it to be like a cleaner kind of game?
I'm not even sure it really has anything to do with concussions and and the negative side of fighting. I think it's just because the skill is so high. I mean, these guys, these young kids, I mean, like 10 years old have more ability than I ever had. You talk about skill, like it's incredible the way they skate and the way they move. And, Flyers acquire a guy like Zegras, and like there's, you got Michkov, like these guys are extremely, extremely gifted with the skill. So if you look just like at the era from like now, even like going back into like the early 2000s when you had a lot of big men, that didn't move that well, but they filled up space. It just there's no more of that. You know what I mean? So having one dimensional guys that could skate in a straight line and hit and fight a little bit, it's just like there's no roster spot for these guys unless you're like that good, of a player. I'm trying to think of a guy in the league that's like that would even fight enough to be even like identified as that now, but that can play a regular shift. But it's never going back to the Broad Street Bullies. Maybe taking the essence of what the Broad Street Bullies represented, and I understand that this like it's a culture around. Yes, it was seemingly about fighting and bullying, but like it was more than that. It was deeper than that. It was really sticking up for each other, but just being hard to play against. You know what I mean? And so the modern day NHL, it's not about we're gonna intimidate anybody through fighting. It's just like being a hard team to play against. And you look at Florida Panthers, not like, any teams like, shaking and trembling like a leaf going into Florida. But like back in the day, they were trembling to go into Philly. Yeah, they had to fight and stuff like that. But going into a building, knowing it's going to be a hard night, is something that's still a thing. And I think that's if they can just extract that piece of the Broad Street Bullies, like the just being a hard team. Yeah, we're not going to take any shit, but like it's not about that. We're just going to be hard. We're going to play, again, I'd say the gold standard is Florida Panthers. They got some big bodies. They make you pay. They hit. They're greasy. You know what I mean? They go in the corners. They're pressuring you all over the ice. Like there's no space. Like you're just like you're suffocating. So I think if you took a page from the modern era of hockey and he infused it with some Philly Broad Street Bully heart. I think that's what this organization's trying to do. I mean, from top to bottom, Rick Talk is a perfect guy in there to instill and keep this legacy, this energy going that Flyers represent. But it's not about the fighting. It's really about how you carry yourself. We had Rick talking on our podcast a couple weeks ago, and the Flyer way. I was expecting him to think, come out and say like something about fighting, but it was just really about the team. It was about like the essence of what like it stood for, and which is like we got each other's back, but like the essence of wearing a Flyer's logo on your chest and playing for the city of Philly is work and heart and grit and get out there and resilience. You know what I mean? All these, yes, they're like the words that everyone throws out there, but that's what it is. You know what I mean? Like you could have 23 super elite skilled guys, but if there's not enough grit out there, you're going to get booed out of that building. You know what I mean? They could have the highest, you could have 23 Zegrases, but if you're not winning puck battles, you're not pressuring and forechecking and hitting and going to the net and being greasy and scoring dirty goals, like you're not going to probably have success, and therefore the fans won't be fully supporting you. So there's a core energy that needs to be cultivated and kept within the Flyers brand, and I think that's really what it is. It's that is the fighting was just a part of it. It was a byproduct of what could happen based on the rules and the era. But I think we've evolved past that. The emotional fights will be there, but I think the intimidation is more from how fast you play the game, how much you pressure the puck, how hard you are, just in all areas, and just being a hard team to play against.
Riley, I want to thank you so much again for the conversation. And I know people can listen and watch you on Nasty Knuckles, but I want people to be able to find you with what you do with cannabis advocacy. So, can you tell everybody where they can find you on that end?
Yeah, so my personal Instagram page is Cote Culture. True Leave, I think underscore PA is you know, really the page that would be highlighting a lot of the cannabis education initiative stuff that we're doing. But I would also be reposting it on my own personal website as well. But I think, you know, maybe following True Leave, seeing what they're up to. They're buzzing around doing, you know, doing their thing in the Pennsylvania market, and hopefully be with them and supporting them along the way as much as I can here. So appreciate the time. It's been great.
Thank you. And for all of those that are listening and watching, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And again, make sure to check out Hockey Hot Stove for all of your latest hockey news. I'm Haley Taylor Simon. You can find me on Twitter at Haley T. Simon, and I will talk to you next time.